Bring, bring, bring. Hello, welcome to
The Literary Voice.
Here are your three lovely hosts. My name is Randall S. Tobias. Who are you?
Janette Rodriguez. My name is Isabel Fernandez, and today's topics will be the origin and trajectories of myth through time in America. More specifically, the American myths of the melting pot, the idea that different cultures and races can blend together, the myth of peaceful colonization, the idea that the colonization of the Americas was mostly peaceful and beneficial to indigenous populations, and white supremacy, the belief in the inherent superiority of white people often used to justify racial inequalities and segregation, and the myth of multiracial democracy, the idea that the U.S. has successfully created a democracy that equally represents and benefits people of all races.
Awesome. And just, we were using Mr. Jason Kalchik's verbiage for that.
Yes.
Okay, I just don't want to get any plagiarism accusations.
No, we are.
Viewers at home.
We are, and I think it's important to mention that we're going to be referencing the Norton Anthology of American Literature, 10th edition.
Yes.
Beginnings. What volume is this?
This is volume A, I believe.
Volume A, in case anyone.
Are you using the 9th? See, we have the
9th and 10th edition.
Yeah, 9th and 10th edition. I know that's so extra and annoying, but...
Just so...
Oh, well.
We're different.
We're different like that. Melting pot, right? So we are going to come at this. Obviously, we have our biases of 21st century Southern California, but we're going to try to be objective in this and what have you. Thanks for bearing with that little chaos intro that was saved so lovely by Izzy. This is our second take. We got half an hour into the first one and it was all botched. So now we're recording on a bunch of devices. That's not really important information for you to know. So...
But it's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun to
We're keeping it fun. But this way we'll be way more concise.
Right.
So, starting off.
Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin, what's up? What's up, Mr. Lightning Man?
Oh, I love him.
Pow.
I feel like you can't really talk about just America without talking about him in history, literature, science.
That's why he's the $100 bill, baby.
Yeah.
He perpetuated a lot of other myths about capitalism and whatnot, but we're not talking about that today.
That's another episode.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was his values, and his whole thing was money, but commerce, Mr. Printer. Okay, focusing. We are going to be talking about Remarks Concerning the Savages of North America, which was published in 1784. So I'm going to start us off today, and I'm going to be talking about Ben Franklin and juxtaposing it with Miss Mary Rowlandson. The coffee just kicked in. We're ready to go. Okay. Basically, Benjamin Franklin does this sort of ethnography. I believe it's the Six Nations. Yes, it's the Six Nations. And he sort of, compared to all the other writings that we've read about indigenous folks, right, that have been by white authors, he takes a very objective standpoint while having this sort of moral relativism injected into it that I think is really interesting and cool to see, because he's fair to the Native Americans and even advocates for them on a couple of occasions. So starting off, I think just with that first sentence, Franklin says, savages, we call them, concerning their manners different from ours, which we think the perfection of civility, they think the same of theirs. So he kind of has, that's it right there, right? He starts it off, he's like, okay, this sort of idea of our culture is the most superior, our culture is the best, right?
Right.
Is flawed inherently. And then I was perusing on Mr. JSTOR. JSTOR's not a person, but...
We love JSTOR.
we love to personify things here. And I came across this article called Franklin's Deistical Indians. This is by Professor Alfred Owen Ulrich, rest in peace probably. He was a professor of English at the University of Maryland, and he published this article in the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society. In his article and his analysis on page 398, he says, inculcation of tolerance, the purpose and satire is the suggested method, bracket of this article. In works of this genre, the contrast between Western civilized society and a primitive or exotic one causes the reader to observe the manners and conduct of his own society from a universal point of view, and to find his own habits and customs no less ridiculous than primitive ones. So, Janette, I think you had something to say about that regarding receptacles for our hydration.
If you look around anywhere, you'll see people holding water bottles, hydro flasks. I know the craze recently was like the Stanley cups. Really anything. People just carry around water bottles.
Yeah.
But it's only really in America. Like outside America and other countries, you don't see that at all. And I think it's kind of funny and it's silly that people will think of Americans as little babies, but I think it also speaks to like the fact that a lot of people in America don't have clean water.
Yeah. So bringing this back to 1784, Franklin describes, the Six Nations in like a fair way. It's not as inferior, but like as this already established thing with these customs of friendliness for strangers and values and emphasis on skills that we in, modern America or 18th century, colonies might not think value. We value our science and our empiricism, right? Mm-hmm. But one of the men describes how they sent, some of their kin to hang out with these white people. I think I don't remember what college it was. No, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, some college. And
they take him basically, and then I think the whole story goes is that they teach him how to read or how to become educated, quote unquote, to them, what it means to be living in a sophisticated civilization. But in reality, when he returns to his tribe, I think this is when one of the leaders or someone or the parents actually say this, right? That they're he's basically useless to us.
Yeah, there are different values of skills, and we kind of hear, I know we didn't mention this at the top, but we have this idea of the myth of the white man's burden, and again, using Jason Kalachek's verbiage, this is the notion that it was the duty of white Americans to civilize and educate other races. So, we see this idea of quote-unquote savages needing to be educated and assimilated, here in San Diego, right? With all these mission schools we had.
Oh my goodness, yes!
I know we did. This wasn't in the plans. This is off the cuff.
No, but we do have a mission in San Diego, which is crazy. And in California, there's missions throughout. And, we take kids on field trips to these missions. Mm-hmm. And it's why? Without telling them, just telling them this is a cool... We lie. We sugarcoat everything throughout history. And I went to school here in California, so I can very much say this is true for so many of my peers that went to schools in other counties in San Diego, not just in San Diego, but I'm sure outside too. I think you went to school in Los Angeles?
No, I went to school in El Cajon. We very much only went to the zoo because that's a poor income high school, and I could say that because they kind of didn't discourage people who were almost there to the finish line and said they couldn't graduate recently. But that was just my experience.
Right, but that's interesting because a lot of these schools in those areas that you say, majority of the population is not white, so they're automatically told hey, look at this instead, look at trade schools instead, and then there's a whole nother discussion that we can talk about another time, obviously not now, about the ROTC programs and the promotion of them in these school districts.
See, I have a very different experience. I grew up in a smaller town in the Midwest outside of Indianapolis, and it was predominantly white, also a pretty large African American population in that region. But again, history is taught from a very white perspective, and
that's the point that we're trying to
get
at.
Yeah, it's the whole point.
That's the point we're trying to get at. We're just going to go into
tangent. We went to Colonial Williamsburg, where everybody cosplayed more or less their fanfic of the Founding Fathers.
That's so wild.
And that's what they call the myth of the Golden Age. We're not counting that as one of our myths we're talking about. So, comparing Franklin's very fair and kind of ethnography to about 100 years earlier, a little more, I think, to the narrative of the captivity and restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson. This was in Lancaster, Massachusetts Bay Area, I believe.
Right.
I don't want to be wrong.
No, I think you are right.
I think I'm right.
Around the time, like you said, we didn't have states yet, right?
No, not quite. Well,
no,
I don't, not
colonies.
Quite. Yeah. Basically, Mary Rowlandson gets kidnapped, and it's pretty bad.
Real bad.
It's really bad. I don't want to discount her, obviously, intense trauma. She's a Puritan. I can't believe I didn't mention that. That informs all of her beliefs. She does approach this viewing and living with these indigenous folks from a very, moral superiority, white supremacy kind of perspective.
Definitely.
And, I don't want to, completely tear her a new one, because she did go through, terror. She lost her kid.
No, she went through a lot.
Yeah, but she still cannot really... She has glimpses of almost being empathetic to the indigenous folks and the women and the children there.
Right.
But they're still heathens and pagans to her.
Yeah, because, just one thing, Roland is sometimes willing to treat the Indians as people, but often hostile to the idea that God's provinces should apply to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's so she doesn't really think that, God's ideas of, going to heaven and stuff really applies to them. So, kind of like what you were saying.
So that's, that's almost predestination, which, again, we could do a whole nother podcast about how Calvinism and Puritanism really affected beliefs in America. But
we need to mention all of this because it's all intertwined into current all-American values, which is why we're kind of going on tangents, but I feel like that makes sense.
Well, yeah, you see...
It's, all connected, and that's what we're trying to get at with
this. You see talking heads on Fox News talking about America was founded on Judeo-Christian values. And I'm like, that's kind of true, but, obviously with these colonies and whatnot, but also, we see later with, the Enlightenment, not really. There's very secular thought that informed it. With Thomas Paine, right? We know, outspoken atheist. This isn't one of the texts we're exploring, but we're just making connections right now off the cuff. And Benjamin Franklin, who was famously, a pretty outspoken, I don't know if outspoken atheist, but...
Well, maybe not atheist per se or outspoken atheist, but I know what you're getting at.
You know what I mean.
Yeah,
he's a man of science.
Man of science.
Aren't they both kind of man of science or no?
Yes.
No, they are. They both are.
Yes, Thomas Paine's hyper-educated. Right, so, that's not true. That's a whole different myth, but not listed. But
we're talking about Rawlinson now.
We're talking about Rawlinson, bringing it back to race, the topic of today. I feel like I did touch on most of what I wanted to say. Is she views them as pagans and heathens? Yeah, and in the end, she views it as providence of God that she saved, right? It's God's protection and God's grace that
it's God's will that she saved from these awful people experiences. That's basically what she depicts them as.
Yeah, connecting it to our tangent, so it wasn't wasted. This idea of religion informing government, religion informing one's beliefs. We're not, shitting on that right now. The caveat is that can be used to justify racism and justify this sort of cultural superiority that you have.
That is used.
That is, yes. Yeah, so our tangent made sense.
Pivoting to me.
Pivoting to Izzy, you have some people you want to talk about.
So
and roll.
I think hearing from Rowlandson's perspective, we can kind of see Cyril Kimball Knight's perspective about the melting pot and the idea that different cultures and races can blend together harmonically in the United States. Saying how Sarah and Rowlandson both have not good views about the indigenous people.
And then, remind me, and the viewers at home. When did she write this? What what time frame? What has changed from Rowlandson's times to Sarah Kimball Knight's times?
I think they're around the same time, no? Or maybe
I
I'm
think
wrong.
Kimball Knight was a little later, and then it's a little less Puritan at this time. I remember I'm paraphrasing here, but the Norton was like, this is a shift from like written in the Puritan perspective to written in a like Yankee.
But Sarah Kimball
right.
Knight was like in the 1700s.
Yeah, okay, so a little
there
later.
we go. Okay.
So this is from her perspective. She kind of wrote about like the cultures that she viewed as she was traveling. But so a situation that happened was it was a slave that belonging to a man in the town stole a hog shed from his master and gave or sold it to an Indian of the native place. The Indian sold it to the neighborhood, and so the theft was found out. Thereupon the heathen was seized and carried to justice's house to be examined. But his worship, it seems, was gone into the field. With a brother in office to gather in his pumpkins, whither the malefactors hurried and complaint made in satisfaction in the name of the justice demanded. Another quote from her writings was, "There are everywhere in the towns as I pass a number of Indians, the natives of the country, and are the most savage of all the savages. Of that kind I had ever seen, little or no care taken, as I heard upon inquiry." So it's kind of like what she's heard, like she's kind of putting that negative connotation attached to them already without like having her own experiences herself to make them otherwise. But I just thought that this shows how races in the United States do not blend together harmonically, because the colonizers do not sympathize with the Indians or the slaves and blame it on them immediately. Like they don't give them a chance to explain themselves, as we see during this time, and put them on trial. Also, the way Sarah speaks, it is apparent that she has no respect for these other races either. Especially when she calls the Native American savages, because that shows the negative connotation she had towards them. They were also considered to be a savage in her view because they had a different religion than her.
So not Christian.
So not Christian. Yeah.
Turning this on its head, and again going off script, off the cuff.
We don't have a script.
We don't have a script, but we have notes. We have extensive notes.
Yeah, we do.
I think this is I'm kind of going in the opposite direction right now, where we view uneducated people in the South as inherently inferior. Like these very hyper-religious communities in like rural Southern communities as inherently less than and dumb. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody else. Like, I'm especially guilty of this, right? People across, I think it's pretty apparent. You can't see me, but just based on the way I dress and talk, that like obviously like I'm a little more left-leaning, perhaps a little more than leaning. But right, like I view these people who are incredibly different from mine. They have a different lifestyle, right? More blue-collar, rural areas as less than me because they have different beliefs than me. And that is obviously it's not racist, right? I'm a white dude, but it is. It's still this idea of like cultural supremacy. I'm fairly well educated, and these folks are not. And therefore, my beliefs are inherently better than theirs, and my way of lifestyle is better than theirs. Well, that's just not fucking true. And I guess having empathy, even for people who might be racist and or might be like incredibly homophobic.
This is an interesting.
This is like a kind of a derailment of what we're talking about, but like climate deniers too. Like why they're in these echo chambers? They're in different communities.
Right.
We can't dismantle racism without like empathy for those who like perpetuate it.
And not putting like your own, what is it called? Like your own cultural values, like
yeah. So like
in order to understand people.
Yeah. yelling at people and telling them they're terrible and evil which is honestly something I've done in Indiana a bunch, isn't super effective.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to also touch on the myth of peaceful colonization. Again, just a quick reminder. The idea that the colonization of the Americas was mostly peaceful and beneficial to the indigenous populations. So we kind of see in Occam's writing, Samson Occam, that's not true necessarily. So in his experience as an indigenous man, so pulling from his writing, he says, when Occam learned that Wheelock intended to use the money raised on the speaking tour to expand the Indian school into a college and move it to Hanover, New Hampshire, he angrily predicted that that his college had too much grandeur for the poor Indians, that they'll never have much benefit of it. And he says he was right. The newly renamed Dartmouth College soon ceased to focus on the educating of Native American students. And in 1773, Occam and Wheelock broke off their long relationship.
Before we go on any tangents, I want everyone to know that I actually opened my computer and looked up who was the founder of Dartmouth College. And to this day, it is still, Wheelock is on their school website.
What?
Yeah.
And it's so crazy because I think if we really go deeper into the text, it goes into like details how prior to this, Occam, he's a really well-educated man, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so he's really preaching education and he wants to educate these Native American communities. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so for him to totally be, I guess, lied to and betrayed by someone who he really trusted, because Wheelock, he was under Wheelock.
Yeah, he was like almost like a father figure, right? Like a tutor, but
he went away with him for a while.
Like they were boys.
Oh yes, it was supposed to be only like a few days, he thought, but it was years.
Yeah, they were boys.
They are.
They fucking betrayed. Oh, sorry.
No, and it's so crazy because as soon as I saw Dartmouth College, Dartmouth is an Ivy League.
Yeah, prestigious. Tip-top.
So prestigious. So for them, and I mean, they still, claim on, like, their website and stuff to be, like, the most, like, welcoming of the Ivies to indigenous people. Yeah. But I just think it's so, like, eerie to know, like, this, like, history and then see that Wheelock is our founder. Like, when it's not true.
Yeah.
When you just look into the history and you're like, well, that's not true because he just betrayed Occam. But like it is shown in like the above, like what I just was talking about from his writings, how the myth of peaceful colonization is not true because Occam was betrayed and lied to by an English man because he believed that the Indians could not be successful and there's no point in educating them. It just shows how Englishmen did not believe that Indians could be anything.
Yeah, and peace doesn't always necessarily involve war. Obviously, there was mass genocide that occurred. If you look at, some of Columbus's writings and all the horrific atrocities that happened in the West Indies. But it's also like backstabbing and deceit out of treachery that's also very insidious.
I think in America there hasn't been at least one instance where I can say peaceful colonization has occurred. So this entire myth that we, colonize these people. Well, hold on. Not me. I was the colonized. But that's besides the point. This is probably like, one of the worst things anyone could have ever done in the history of humanity. The effects of colonization are still seen today, especially not just in these Native communities, but in all communities that aren't white. We see loss of land, specifically when it comes to indigenous people. Erasure of culture and language and just overall historical roots. It's just impacted basically their entire existence. I think it's also important to know before I finish my thoughts on this that colonization is really intertwined with capitalism, and all of these systems of oppression result in systemic racism. Regardless of whatever way you try to spin it, it all results in poverty and social and economic inequality.
Yeah, like the idea that different cultures and races can blend together harmonically in the United States. We can really see that, and I would say like a modern connection, like an actual, like where we could see it in like laws and stuff, is it is believed how now we can all get together as it is a modern time. However, police brutality and racism against minorities continues in today's time.
Yeah.
Showing in protest, and according to NBC News, the SB 1070 law was enacted in 2010, allowing police to capture anyone who seemed to be in the country illegally, giving police basically the power to like question or detain any like people of color, basically. In other words, this broad power given to the police officers had a significant impact on Arizona's Mexican youth, who constantly had to watch their backs because their families were continually being taken away because of their race.
So yeah, that's just like racism. So this is in Arizona. I wonder how, I don't know if there's like a law like that here, but
Yeah.
that's absurd.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like
But
just like, even like if it was just like well, because like nowadays I guess they're like called cholos, but like
yeah,
like just because of the way that they dressed, and like they were just hanging out with their friends at a park and just skating, like they would just take them away, and it's like that's someone's like kid at home.
Yeah.
Like they may have like, especially in like Mexican culture, I know older like siblings of the family, they have to take care of the kids. So imagine like a kid who's an older kid who's kind of a big part of helping out the family is taken away. Then it's also affecting them, like the family, because not only are they missing their child, but they're not getting that like care that they need, like to make the food, to watch over the kids, because the parents are working because they're trying to afford their house, like you know, it's crazy.
Damn, and that's 2010. Was it repealed?
I'm not sure if it was repealed, but I think there was still notions of it, because I did write an essay about this for my Chicano studies class. Yeah.
Which is interesting because Arizona's not that far from us, even though we are in, you know, California. Arizona's still a border town. The border's right there.
So it's actually partially struck down.
Okay, that's good.
So I think
hell yeah.
I think they realized that this was an issue, and like they can't just give police such broad power to just people.
Police are an occupying military force. Just kidding. That's a claim that I don't want to back up or explore right now.
Do you guys know what the budget is?
No.
No, it's so ridiculous.
For them?
For them.
To write out parking tickets all day.
Yeah, to write out parking
Okay,
tickets
so
all day.
tell them, what is it?
No.
That is a lot. Well,
that is a lot.
That is a lot,
that is
but it's
lot
also
more than it should be.
Maybe.
Way more. No, not maybe.
Okay.
That
What
money
is
could
their
be
salary like?
I don't
be
know.
used for so much more.
Let's move to Hendrik.
So, oh my goodness. Okay. So I guess when we talk about Hendrik, something that really stands out that's like just super apparent and kind of related to Occam too is
Because they actually fought together during the Revolutionary War.
yes, Pumont, I believe that's how you say it, is also one of the first ethnographic Native American, no, you're right, ethnographic American, Native American writers during this time.
Okay.
And so he was very interesting because he was a well-educated man. I mean, he fought during the Revolutionary War, and he was like a good soldier. So he actually went up in ranks, and at some point he was also a diplomat to George Washington.
Yes.
Yeah, which is crazy. Yeah, so he was heavily involved with politics.
Okay.
I think like a little quote
go ahead.
is that like his diplomatic initiatives continued for nearly 2 decades and were dedicated to finding peaceful resolutions to conflicts between the United States and Native communities.
Right, which is like the main point about this is that he really was used by the U.S. And so his writings, the history of Mohicannock Indians is kind of gives us like an insight to the fact that they had a well-civilized government, you know, these Native communities. And so really what the myth of multiracial democracy is, it's the idea that the U.S. has successfully created a democracy that equally represents and benefits people of all races, when we know that this isn't true, especially when it comes to the indigenous peoples. I mean, they literally used him to resolve, quote unquote, these like tensions between them.
Yeah, like even because I don't know if you remember, like when Professor was showing us the articles from the other day, but he said like a couple acres of land was now, like after many years, just returned to the indigenous people.
Yeah, that was in Big Sur area, like Monterey County. So that's like cool that we did it, but it's like a small, tiny fraction.
Yeah, that is
like
this
whole
so long.
This whole country.
Long.
And there is obviously like lots of thriving and pretty active, indigenous communities within America. I know.
No, there are. But
and like I know. I want to pull up a map.
Go ahead.
Well, I know like one that's near is in Ramona.
Yeah,
one of my friends lives over there.
One of my friends, this friend who's part of like the Yaqui community and Mercer Community Centers, and like a large part of the Four Corners has been given back, in different parts in the western United States. The east, it's few and far between. Indiana has no reservations.
I think it's super important to acknowledge the fact that we occupy right now Kumeyaay land. Yeah. So there is still so much, like this land is so deadly. Like we are on top of graves.
Yeah.
And that just isn't talked about enough, and it's just so normalized. And so this myth really talks about, I guess we can tie this into now, what really is democracy to us. We all can vote, we're of age to vote. Yeah. And I think that that's super important for us to read up on this, because this is going to affect us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and representation is super important. And obviously, if you look at the color gradient of the people in the United States Congress, it's not representative of
not at all.
Population.
You really.
And I think now we're seeing more and more movement to
right.
minorities in educational roles, right?
You really can't build a real multiracial democracy when one is scared to face its bloody origins. So, and I think that's what's really important, and why this myth really stands out to me is that there's a bunch of division when it comes to everything, obviously, but I think we need to question where this is all coming from and the origins, and I think questioning origins of all American values and how they stem and all come from these myths is super important.
I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent. It'll be like 2 minutes.
No, go ahead.
So out of Southern California, other coast, in Florida, right, we have these PragerU videos and education, right, quote unquote, that is approved government, for use. And there's this whole like animatic of Columbus talking about slaves and his slavery and how they were fine, like they were like fine with it, and like Columbus, not a good dude.
Not a good dude.
By 21st century standards, or by 15th century standards, did horrible atrocities, cut off people's hands, completely wiped out a population, enslaved a lot of people, and that's right there is like a direct perpetuation of the myth of peaceful colonization. And now it's a culture war, and that's like facts, and history is now politicized.
There's this large myth of how it was founded, but in reality it was founded on, it relied on burying the histories of Native American genocide and stolen land. There's racial violence and discrimination against people of color.
Yeah.
Still, there's still racial violence all the time. I don't know.
Yeah, one time, actually at my school, multiple people were like threatening to get in a fight with me, even guys.
Really?
Yeah, when it wasn't even a situation that had to do with them. It was me and my friend and this other two people, my ex and this other person. And I guess the school brought me and my friend down, and they said that we caused a riot.
Oh.
Yeah, so then my mom went to the school and she was like, my kid did not start a riot. She's like an A student. I was taking an AP class at the time. So clearly I'm not that kind of person, and I've never done anything before. Yeah. And she was like, that's just ridiculous. This is not going to go on her record, and she's transferring schools.
Hell yeah.
But it's kind of like, it was also like...
You think it was race-based?
Yes, definitely. How are they going to say we caused a riot when literally when other guys were threatening me?
Yeah. right?
I'm like, how does that even make any sense? And we weren't even being loud at all. It was like it was the other people we were fighting, like we were just talking to. We were like, we don't want to fight you at all, and they were like, no, we want to fight now. I'm like, and we're not even the ones. We're saying we don't want to fight. We don't want to get into trouble. But how are we causing a riot?
Yeah, that's absurd.
A riot, literally. Come on, this is high school.
You know, questioning who does it benefit at the end of the day? It's not
like
people
for example,
of color.
Yeah, if that were to go onto my record, that would affect my chances of like if I wanted to go to a 4-year like, and if I wanted to go through a full like scholarship, I couldn't have done that because of my record. Insinuating a riot.
That's on your record?
No, if
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I
If
understand now.
my mom were not to have stood up for me the way that she did for me, then like it would have gone on my record.
Shout out to Izzy's mom.
Yes.
She's a union representative for healthcare workers.
I love Union Strong.
OPEIU Local 30. I was also in one of the strikes for Kaiser.
Yes.
Okay. That's so badass.
That is.
Yeah, she also...
Shout out to moms.
Shout out to mom.
It feels like every other week, like another black like kid will be like murdered by a cop.
Yeah.
I saw something recently, but I don't want to speak like anecdotally or dismissively of like a very serious situation because somebody died. In order for time's sake, I'd want to give like if I mentioned an individual like enough time and respect to discuss that at length.
Correct.
Which I do not think we currently have. Any other final points? I think we touched on everything.
Yeah.
I mean,
We did our contextual research. We did so many modern connections, perhaps too many. No such thing. We did explication.
And we had our one scholarly source.
Yeah, and we did probably more myths than we intended to.
Yeah.
right.
But they're everywhere.
But that's just like
That's
how...
the point.
Like...
I've gleaned so much
How
from this
much-
class.
Right.
Yeah.
So many connections. But shouts out to all podcasters who are concise. Shouts out to NPR. I guess National Public Radio for giving. Oh wait, National Public Radio. I'm so embarrassed right now.
All podcasters, I think they had to like practice and like memorize all these like sources like in their
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they probably just have like
Well,
cue
like-
cards.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
everything.
There's
But
also like
still.
some people in the background who they like research that and then they'll
Yeah,
research
yeah,
it
yeah.
and then they'll show it on the screen.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor, for listening to this for so long.
We hope you enjoy.
We hope you enjoyed it. We're really sorry sorry LRC, we're too loud. Shouts out this episode's sponsor, the Living Room Cafe. Where this idea was born and fostered and blossomed from our heads to the page, back to our heads, to our voices,
I think that's
to our iPhone.
That is so beautiful, Randy.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Bye.
Bye guys.